Yeah. Still doing good?
Woo, woo.
Y'all doing good? Yep. Oh, y'all doing good? How about y'all?
Oh, yeah.
Awesome. Just wanted to kind of look at y'all again from this morning. All these faces. Just awesome. Well, we are here tonight. We have come together at God's call in our midst. And we're just blessed at the opportunity to be the church. Be the church tonight. And to embrace the love that Christ holds us in and to embrace each other in that love, which is just an awesome opportunity. Sometimes when you listen to all the challenging news going on in the world, I mean, when has that not been the case? The challenging news all the time going on in the world, always. There's something really magnificent about taking time and opportunity to come together in love and grace and be the church. And so God has called us together, and we have a joyous task ahead. It looks like almost every single seat is filled, which is really cool. This is just really great. Well, we're here tonight for the first of our series of 4 sessions that we're entitling Unity. It's like, I don't remember the first word. Unity of the Church and Human Sexuality Toward a Faithful Witness. You know that we've been on a journey for nearly 2 years. You've heard me talk about it a number of times, again and again, because you kind of need to do that in order to keep that journey present. Almost 2 years now. About 2 years now is when the staff of the church, particularly the program staff of the church, started meeting and just trying to get a feel for what the issues were facing the church, and the way a program staff needs to as it thinks about a year coming up. In October, you're starting to think about the year ahead. And it seemed like every time we were meeting, for a couple of months before then, we were talking a lot, actually since that spring, when General Conference met for its regular session, and it was a really dramatic, kind of appalling session of our General Conference, and so much divisiveness. And from then on, my heart had been kind of churning about where does that leave our congregation? Where does that lead? Where is God leading our congregation? And so we were talking about it. It would come up from various ones of us in our staff meetings. And I think it was Lisa who finally said, I feel like we're kind of hearing this as a call to be thinking about where we need to be in this story. What do we need to do in response to the challenges that our culture is facing and our church, our denomination is facing, and that, like any church, sometimes it comes up in the church. One of the good news pieces is that we are not one of the severely conflicted congregations in our denomination. Or in other denominations, in other branches of the church, there are congregations in conflict all the time. That happens. The good news is we are a remarkably strong, stable, vibrant, healthy, dynamic, empowered, impassioned, loving, give me more adjectives. I could go on forever. A family that is really rocking. So that's the good news. But it's really important for us to kind of flex those muscles of being able to communicate well with each other and deal with any conflicts as they arise. And so we started realizing that maybe we were hearing a call to explore all these things rather than ignore them. And so we began meeting with leadership in the church, and a whole lot of leaders said, we're kind of feeling like this is a call too. And we started enlarging the circle more and more, and then starting a group of people without a defined, they weren't a defined group anybody was welcome, in other words. It was whoever showed up at meetings, not a closed list. People to start talking about how we might embrace the living love of Jesus Christ. That language started emerging, the living love of Jesus Christ. And be agents of it, be vessels of it, be the embodiment of Christ's hands and heart and feet and voice alive and at work in the world today. A world that needs that living love of Jesus Christ, and as people who need it too. And we decided it was really important to get the feedback from the congregation, so we had that Easter service where people said, this is what living love means to us. And this set of sessions is an outgrowth directly of that journey and the kinds of feedback we got on Easter Sunday, and the knowledge that that we have important work as United Methodist Christians in the United Methodist Church to do right now. So we are on this journey of living love, and we now have this 4-session series in which we are seeking to gather up tools for our toolkit. To maybe another way to put it is to flex those muscles again. Just kind of stretch out those muscles of good, strong, healthy, Christ-centered communication skills. Holy conversation. We'll talk more about that tonight. So that we can continue to foster a community of trust in the church, to grow that experience of trust and respectful interrelationship in the church, so that we can be a people more empowered to face the challenges of our day, to be a people who can address some of the issues of our day. Now, some folks have expressed, just in casual conversations, now, is this like a session where you're trying to teach us how to feel about these things, about the issue in this particular case, the issue of language about human sexuality and whatever the stands are you can take on that? Is this about that? And I said, oh, no. This is a situation where we're coming together recognizing that we're a diverse congregation. We're diverse in a lot of ways. We're diverse, well, a lot of the ways we're diverse. I won't go into all that. I could talk forever. We're a diverse congregation. And my aim is not to make us all think the way I think. I think if that were my aim, I would be naive and wrong-headed. That's not what ministry together is about. That's not what being the church is about. The church has never marched in lockstep about all the issues that we could possibly face. The church with a capital C, the church around the world, the church in the times of Jesus and the disciples and Paul and the early church and all the way through the time of John Wesley. Oh my goodness. It's not about all coming down to the same answers to all the sets of questions, but it is about having a heart of love. And it is about having an openness and trust amongst ourselves so that we can foster that in the world. So that's what this is about. We're not trying to, as we gather one with another, to all change each other's minds about this particular issue, or if we gather in the future about whatever other issues we could talk about. But we are trying to be real with each other, be present, fully, authentically present, respectfully present with each other, and to create that environment where we feel we can be heard and we can hear, we can listen well and speak well. I've said before, I said even this morning, my goal is that this will empower us that much more to come to whatever happens at General Conference in February, holding hands together as a congregation. So that we've visited some of the places that are kind of challenging places to talk about, and we've visited them successfully. So that's part of what's going on. Tonight, the session is the first one, and tonight we talk about what holy conversation is. Try it out a little bit. We don't go down all the possible pathways we could along this particular topic. We just get started on the idea of holy conversation. So this is like one of the best sessions to equip ourselves. Next week we have Denise Domkowski-Hopkins, who is the top theology professor, I guess you could say, that's a better way to put it, at Wesley Seminary, our local United Methodist Seminary, and widely respected. Again and again, as I've talked about this with colleagues, they've said, get Denise Hopkins here, get Denise here, get Denise here. I don't actually know her, but it's time I do. She is highly respected, and so she'll help us to engage the scriptures around the topic. And then the week after that, we're going to think about where the United Methodist Church has been on this journey and what's going on now and where we might be headed as a denomination. And we're bringing in, we're looking at using some video resources and also talking about the presenters who will be a part of it as well. More on that. And then the last session, we'll think about where we as a church are after we've kind of, worked through some of the topics of our first 3 sessions. Where are we as a congregation? Where might we be headed? What is our way forward? Not that we're deciding anything, but we're talking about it. We're dreaming, we're visioning, we're being imaginative, and sharing with each other. So that gives you a sense of kind of grounding in where we are tonight. Now, I'm going to get out of the way because the person I've had my back to all this time is Stephanie Hickson. Stephanie comes to us from the General Board of Church and Society of the United Methodist Church, the agency Just Peace, which is a part of that wonderful arm of the church. It's centered in D.C. on Capitol Hill in the United Methodist Building. Which is right across the street from the Capitol. If y'all don't know, we have one of the prime locations in all of Washington, D.C. as a denomination, and we use it well. And so Just Peace is part of that. Stephanie has a background that is wide and varying and rocks according to me, and you can see why in a moment. First of all, she has a degree in music therapy from Shenandoah University. Anybody else in the room have a degree in music therapy? Like, I'm the mom of a music therapist.
I'm the aunt of a music therapist.
There you go. That's right. From Shenandoah University, of course. Right. So we're just like rocking your seat. Also a degree in music education from Shenandoah University. Also a Master in Divinity degree from the Lutheran Seminary at Gettysburg. She is an ordained elder in the United Methodist Church. And she has a certification from the Hamlin School of Law. I'm sorry, I keep losing the name Hamlin. The Hamlin School of Law in Minnesota, right? In alternative dispute resolution, which means she is highly skilled in facilitating a journey through severe conflict situations. You know how hard that is? How exceptionally difficult that is. It's really cool to hang out with someone who's good at that, and it's really good to know that we don't need those services. So happy that we're coming to you for peace-building skills.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what we're coming to her for. And I love the language that's found on the website where it talks about how she and her colleagues relish the opportunity to help local churches to be centers of relational healing and peace building for their members and for the neighborhoods in which they reside. Relational healing and peace building in our church and in the world. That's what we're equipping ourselves to do. That's what this world needs. So thank you very much, Stephanie, for being here with us, and we look forward to
Thank you. It is indeed my honor to be with you tonight and to have walked some of this journey with those on the Living Love group. So I know that a few more people have arrived than perhaps there were chairs around the tables for, and that's a wonderful thing. So we celebrate that. We do have a process that involves facilitators this evening, and so that's why we're inviting us to get a bit cozy around the table. So thank you for your understanding about that, but that's why we're helping to have folks gather around the 5 tables that are here. So with that being said, holy conversation. Holy conversation, the topic, of course, is unity in human sexuality in the church and finding that faithful way forward, but holy conversation is the focus for this evening. What makes conversation holy to me is the holy. And so we are gathered here because of who we are and because of whose we are. And that's part of our calling, I believe. Conversation, I think, from my perspective and my understanding of God, is something that we are invited into on an ongoing basis. Now, some of us are quiet persons, and so we may not converse, publicly or openly very often, but God has called us, created us, and called us into community with God, with one another, and of course with ourselves in terms of that relationship. So conversation is a part of who we are as Christians, as faithful ones, following that. So I invite you to join with me as you're able to see this, and I'll read it with us, but those of you who are able to see, invite you to join with me in this scripture from Ephesians 4, because it is by grace that we are gathered together, and it is a gift, I believe, to be with all of you and for all of you to be together in a conversation such as we are having this evening. So let's claim that gift in reading of this scripture.
Be completely humble and gentle. Be patient, bearing with one another in love. Make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. There is one body and one Spirit, just as you were called to one hope when you were called. One Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is over all, and through all, and in all. But to each one of us, grace has been given as Christ apportioned it.
This is the word of God. Thanks be to God. But to each one of us, grace has been given as Christ apportioned it. So we are all gifted, and we all have grace in various portions to offer in these conversations this evening. Part of what we will do each week is to remind ourselves of the presence of Christ in our midst. And so we have just some symbols of a reminder of that. We have a candle which represents Christ. The Christ candle is a candle that is used at Easter time. Some of you might remember that. And even in our ordinary every Sunday worship, the Little Easters, we have our candles that remind us of the presence of Christ in our midst. On your tables, and what we'll be using this evening is a talking piece, and it is in the shape of a cross. There are various ones that persons will use this evening, and it is a reminder of the gift of Jesus Christ to us and all that Christ has given us, and the reality of being called into, as Pastor Tracy had said, called into that living love in a way that expresses Christ in our midst. Thanks. And so when you pass this token, this talking object, whatever you want to call it, it is a cross. It is a reminder of Christ in our midst. And we also have this evening, this is actually a singing bowl, but I'm using it in order to sound a bell for us. Bells for Christians often are a call to reminder of places of worship, to the highest calling of God in our midst as the bells ring in the heavens. And so as we light the candle and ring the bell and say a prayer together, we will then call Christ's Spirit into our midst. You're welcome to say the opening with me. May the Christ who lives within us all during this time, may that Christ move among us, through which God's insights might move and God's love be experienced in all our depths. Amen.
And God's people said again, Amen. A few guiding principles for this series. These are from my colleague Craig Gillum, and I've appreciated them, so he's given me permission to share them. Whoever shows up are the right people. Sometimes when we gather an event, we might worry about who we don't see present, or who said they might be present and then didn't show up. We might even be worried about who didn't say they were present and they showed up. You know, that's whoever shows up are the right people. Whoops, I'm back here. Whenever it happens is the right time. It's been a long time, a long journey that's gotten to the place of having this series, and there's a lot going on this fall, is there not? But you know what? This is the time. So this is the time. Whatever happens is what needs to happen. As you heard earlier, there is not a specific outcome that is planned for these conversations in this series. This is about equipping and empowering all of you as a community to walk together in deeper ways. Be open to God whose middle name is surprise. I don't know about you, but I have facilitated a lot of conversations and been in a lot of different congregations, and I'm always surprised by God. I am always surprised, and I celebrate that. When it's over, it's over. Now that doesn't mean we're going to hang out for a long time tonight, because as much as I like looking at all of you, and I hope I'm not too bad to look at, we're going to finish on time, okay? But the idea is, if we've said all that there is to say, you know, in a couple of weeks when we come together and we've said all that there is to say, then we pray and we finish and we move on. Now, the talking object I already mentioned, and the one with the talking object has the privilege of talking, and others are invited to listen with compassion and curiosity. So, we're sitting at table. We love the circle process at Just Peace. It's used in a variety of different settings with a variety of different kinds of populations and people. I don't know how many of you have experienced circle conversations before, talking objects, that sort of thing. It's an ancient practice, but we adapt it in facilitation oftentimes because it's a measured, intentional approach to having conversation with one another. And especially when there are content matters or topic matters that can touch us deeply, it helps to have that kind of a container, if you will, that kind of structure that's very intentional and helps us to be measured and deliberate about our conversation. So circles can come in all shapes and sizes, as we see tonight. You know, we're around rectangle chairs. One of the pieces that is important, and if you've been in facilitated conversations or even in some things at school or at work before, you may have had things that they call ground rules and those kinds of things for engagement. We prefer to speak of this as a relational covenant. We talked about being in a relational way, being a healing and relational body as a church. And so a relational covenant is very simple. It's shared values that are in action. They're practical, expressed in a practical manner. And so these are a couple of things to keep in mind, not only tonight for this holy conversation, but in the subsequent holy conversations that we'll have together. Speak with respect. Part of that means speak only when you have the talking piece. Speak from the heart. Speak only for yourself. Use all of those good skills, as Tracy said, flex those muscles again, using those I statements. Be specific and focus on the question. Speak in a way that encourages conversation. There are some things that I call stop sign statements. You said what and did what? How could you think that? It's hard to follow up with a statement after that sort of statement is offered to another. Be brief and to the point. We will not tolerate demeaning and hateful speech, and I expect that you will hold one another accountable to that.
Sometimes emotions can get intense, and so if you find yourself in that place that it feels like something's erupting within you, you might step away, take a breath, come back to the table. Be gentle with yourself and one another. This is really important, especially around the kinds of things that we will be talking about, not only tonight, but in the next 3 times that we will be together. It touches many of us so very deeply in our soul, in our being, in our families, and in our church. And so be kind to yourself and be kind to one another. Be gentle with yourself. Take responsibility for yourself. If you need to just sit back and step away or take care of yourself, Tracy's here too. Just go and sit with her for a while. Do what you need to do. And be gentle with others. Be attentive to one another in these conversations. Listen with respect. Listen for understanding. Tracy gave you that sort of sketch of my education, and so I went from the sort of art, philosophy kind of focus to, I wanted to learn the technicalities of alternative dispute resolution, some of which is what we call the soft kind of conversation, but some of it's very hard and technical, as you know. And so in law school, oftentimes, what I was invited to do was to get the other person to say what I wanted them to say, which is the antithesis of what I'm inviting us to do tonight, right? But some of us may be in fields or, workplaces or schools or that sort of thing when that's what's encouraged, is to get someone to say what we want them to say. So instead of listening for understanding, we may be immediately thinking in our head about how we're going to rebut or come back to the person who's said the last statement. Have you ever been in that kind of a situation? The committee in my head does that all the time, so I have to really monitor myself. Be open to God's leading, the Spirit's prompting, and the Christ that you find in one another. If you find others or yourself even disagreeable, the invitation is to turn to wonder. Wonder what's going on in Stephanie inside me that I'm feeling that way. I wonder what she means when she said this. And the talking object. The one with the talking object has the privilege of speaking. Others are invited to listen with compassion and curiosity. So that's the invitation to the covenant. Speak with respect, listen with respect, be gentle with yourself and others, and to use the talking object. So the purpose is really to find a relatively safe or sacred space. Forgive me for the turning the back on that. I have my little reminders of what time I'm supposed to be at certain points in the presentation. So if you hear a little gentle bell, that's what it is. How do we find a sacred space, a relatively safe space? And I say relatively safe space, and we were talking earlier, sometimes we talk about a courageous space, a brave space. We cannot ensure safety. But we are called to be brave and courageous, to be intentional about a space where we can engage, even around these kinds of matters that mean so much to us, where we have a sense of respect and equity. We live out of that relational covenant. We have a voice, even the quiet ones. We speak and hear what matters. We share candidly, unencumbered by motions and procedures, where this is not about a decision-making or Robert's Rules of Order or putting a particular legislative piece forward. This is about heart-to-heart conversation. Experience deep listening and respectful speaking, feel responsible and accountable for our interactions, outcomes, and seek to discern together God's call. So, with that, I'm going to walk over and deliver the talking piece to Laura and invite you to the first part of your circle conversation, if you don't mind passing that along. more to share with one another, and hopefully as we move through the weeks together, you'll have an opportunity to do that, and cross tables as well. How many of you had pretty similar experiences? How many of you learned that you had different experiences? Yeah, yeah, that happens, that happens. And you can reflect more as we continue through on just, you know, the whole sensibility around what it means to be at table and the kinds of things that help form you when we sit around table together. So I often like to talk about something from a colleague of mine, Eric Law, whose exercise, this is adapted from his exercise. But this whole concept of the iceberg analogy, I don't know about you, but it helps me to remind myself when I'm knee to knee with people around tables like this, of the iceberg analogy, that there's a whole lot that's underneath the surface that we don't necessarily see or can't engage fully for a variety of different reasons, but to be respectful of that. You know, sometimes when somebody says something or we bump up against someone literally in a conversation, just to remember, oh yeah, we're like little icebergs gathered around this table. And so I want to be gentle with myself, and I want to be gentle with you, and I want to help to understand myself more fully, and you as well. So I hope that concept is a helpful one, and you can see even, imagine when you're, some of you who have now partnered, married, you know, are in various kinds of family relationships. If you grew up with one family table that said, you know, you must be quiet, you can be seen but not heard. You've heard that sort of thing in old, whereas others where it was y'all come and very, you know, a sort of vibrant, engaging, anybody can be a part of the table type of situation. When those families come together to make a new family, that can sometimes be a bit challenging, can it not? The same way in church. When we've been formed in a variety of different ways in our belief systems, in our way of engaging, it's not such an easy thing just to sit down and talk about the things that matter most. So that's the compassion that I invite you to be a part of. I invite our facilitators now to move on to some specific questions. And I want to say a word about the questions that you'll be hearing from the facilitators in these table conversations. There are 3 specific questions that we'll engage around tables about. The whole series is Unity in Human Sexuality, Unity in the Church and Human Sexuality. In these questions and on the outline that you have, you're going to see the term homosexuality. I want to say a word about why that's used. As Tracy was discussing earlier, there are important matters before our General Conference of the United Methodist Church. That General Conference being the body that decides on policy, positions, etc., much of which is contained in what we call our Book of Discipline. And so that is representative of not only those beliefs and policies, but our order, how we organize ourselves, what our sort of rule of law is, and all of those kinds of things as well. So in that Book of Discipline for decades, the term that has been used is homosexuality or homosexual. And so that's the common term that wherever we are in, positioned in the conversation, or from wherever we stand in the conversation or enter into it, we may have all sorts of other kinds of important words and terms that we want to be a part of that, but the choice is to use that to be sort of the centering place that allows us to enter from that position. I understand that for some the terminology may be confusing, it may not be helpful, but that's where it comes from, and it seemed like the best way to present the question in this kind of circumstance. Okay. So, invite our facilitators to move through the questions with you. This first question is sort of about just where we enter in the conversation. I'll say it aloud, and the facilitators can take it from there. Some of us have engaged in the topic of homosexuality in the church frequently. For others, this may be one of the few times we've had an opportunity for conversation. So we invite you to think about your own experience. On a scale of 1 being little or no conversation, and 5 being quite a bit of conversation, where do you see yourself on the scale 1 through 5? 1 being very little conversation about the topic of homosexuality in the church, 5 being quite a bit of conversation. Where do you see yourself on that scale? Invite the facilitators to help you share a little bit with one another as you're comfortable and as you're able. Remember, speak with respect, listen with respect, be gentle with yourself and others, and use the talking piece. Sheets on your table, I believe, that have an exercise called an at-meal exercise. One of the things that has become apparent to me about conversations that I'm in when they're really meaningful conversations or conversations at the heart of things is that sometimes they can surprise me. I don't know if you've been in situations before where you think you know someone really well and you're in the midst of the conversation and suddenly something erupts and you wonder, where did that come from? I remember in one of my earliest years in college, a friend of mine that I studied with all the time, he opened the door for me one day, which he didn't typically do, but he opened the door for me one day, and I turned around and I just snapped at him. And he said, "Who was that? Because that's not the Stephanie that I know." And I had to kind of think through that and unpack that a little bit. And as we talked together, there were things that had happened in that class that had just stirred up some stuff in me that made me a little on edge. I don't know if you've experienced that sort of thing before, but I have. And one of the things that I was mindful of as I reflected on that experience and many others is that when we are invited to engage one another, it's really important, I think, to prepare ourselves well. And part of that is not only turning to God and asking for God's help, but learning even more every day about ourselves and about where we've come from and how we've been formed. So this exercise, we're just going to tip our toe in the water of this exercise, just the first page, just to learn enough about some of your experiences, early experiences of being at meal. And then I'll reflect on it a little bit more with you after you've had a chance to look at it. So take a few minutes. Just on the first page, you can take it with you and do more with it later, but as your facilitators see that you sort of responded to the first page, I invite you then as facilitators to go ahead and talk about if your experiences are somewhat similar or somewhat different in your earliest experience of being at meal. Again, be gentle with one another and with yourself. Some of us have really wonderful experiences of being at meal early in our years. Some of us do not. Thank you for your investment in the conversation. As we transition from conversation to closing for the evening, I just want to remind you, in our covenant we talked about speaking for ourselves, if you remember that. And part of speaking for ourselves also means that we don't speak for other people, especially the personal stories that folks have shared with us tonight around table. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't engage that person or invite that person to be in conversation in some other ways, but I want to be clear that, you know, my story is my story to tell, and your story is yours. it's not my job to tell your story for you. Does that make sense? So a certain amount of respect for just holding sacred persons' own witness and stories that they have shared. If they come to you and you agree that these are things you want to talk about in other places, that's up to you. That's a journey that you can take together. This is a foundation for conversation. Next week, there will be some specific content around engaging God's Word. The third week, some specific content about what's going to be before the special conference, general conference in February. And then in the fourth session, of course, specifically how, as a community, we walk together. Final comments from Tracy, and then I'll wrap this up for the evening.
Thanks, Stephanie. I want to be sure that you all are aware that I believe there are index cards at each table. And we're wanting to be sure that this series is a time when we can receive feedback as the series goes on to help to enhance it, or to just give us information that would be helpful for us to know. So if you want to pass any of that on to us, you're welcome to jot down a note, pass it to me if you wish, or turn it into the church office, and then we can receive that as helpful feedback throughout this journey. In addition, you will be interested in knowing that we are seeking to provide an opportunity for you to catch up if you need to be away from one of the sessions, one or more, and you'd like to still be able to participate overall. So we've been taping the presentation portion, obviously not the table conversations, but the presentation portion of this evening, just so that if anybody missed it and would like to join in later, they can know some of that covenantal conversation we've had with one another, and what the style of the table conversations is intended to be like. We'll be having this kind of opportunity to speak with one another at tables throughout the 4 sessions. This is not just tonight. This table conversation style is very much what we're doing throughout. So we will let you know through an email link. I don't know if that's the best way to put it, Lisa, email link, how to hear portions of the sessions that you may miss. And you can also let another person know if they're interested in coming and miss tonight, then they can, once we have that sent out to everybody, then that's a way that they can catch up on what they may have missed. Obviously, it's not the same as being here and participating in a conversation with one another. That's just listening, that's not a two-way conversation. But at least it means that you can kind of keep up with the flow of things. The last thing I wanted to mention can be summed up with each one bring one. We have 50 people here tonight, which is a wonderful thing. That's really great. I bet there are a few more tables in the other room that we could pull out, and a few more chairs that we could also set up for next time or the next time if more than 50 people come. So we would love to make that a reality as well. I mean, I'm delighted with 50, but I'm even more delighted with more. It's just the way that is. So you are all invited to be sure to mention it to people, that this is not a weird, scary thing, but instead is something that I hope you'll find is worth doing. And that means bearing witness to it with one another and inviting others to join in the conversation. So each one bring one, or whatever way you want to put it in your own words. What a privilege it is to be together tonight, and what a privilege it is to be the church all the time. And so thank you for your investment in this experience, and particularly for your response to God's grace moving in your own life by saying yes to coming to something like this.
Thank you, Tracy.
And thank you, Stephanie.
Oh, yes. I invite you to just a moment of quietness before we extinguish the candle and have our closing blessing. And as we're as we're in quiet, I want you to be mindful of all the people that you've been in conversation with. Prayerfully thinking about them. And knowing that this circle, though you may not be in the same configuration again at any time in the future, this is a sacred circle in which many of you shared very significant pieces of your soul and your life. And so I invite you to honor that and be mindful of that as we exit from one another tonight. And we'll exit with this prayer. And join me if you will. Let's say it together and then I'll extinguish the candle. May the Christ who has moved among us return within us as we go on our way, full of God's grace and peace. Amen. Thanks for the privilege of being with you. Go in peace.